Hey folks, so this is a more longer form version of some of the things that I've been looking at and mulling through and trying to figure out like how I could use Blender for projection mapping. So this is more of just a continuation of what I was doing the other day. I just wanted to kind of give a little bit more like expansion on what I've already done and also just kind of like think about what other kinds of ways I could use this technique. So one of the things that's really great about geometry nodes is it allows you to control a great many of things. On the right hand side here, you'll notice there's a series of different options that I have set up. I could set all of these to MIDI controllers and then slide them as I see fit. I could also use a program called Chatagen, and Chatagen, or Chatane, however you say it. I probably am murdering the name, but in any case, that program would allow audio reactivity within Blender. And then I could basically push this as a spout output to my program of choice. So in my particular case, it would probably be Resolume, or it would be Synesthesia, or Heavy M, one of the three. But I just wanted to kind of give a quick little like just rundown of some of the things that I can control. Right at this moment, one of the things that I figured out is that you could create like a grouping of specific things. Like for instance, I have this square, which is actually nothing more than the arch I had before. It's just in a different configuration. So to give you an example, I can move this option here to the left. I can move this entire section. I can change the color. I can make this lighter, right? We could make this like bright, right? We could move around the lighting itself, which is quite nice. So if I hit G, Shift, Z, I could move this around, right? And it would play with the other light that's in the scene, but it would also allow me to move it around. I could change its scale, size, location, color. Again, this is something else I could also set up within a MIDI control. In this particular case, because there's so many different controls that you would have, I would probably lean more towards OSC and doing something like Touch OSC. And the reason for that is because then you could control like XY coordinates, and you could have multiple XY coordinates for instance, the lighting, and then you could have XYZ coordinates for the actual object itself. Or alternatively, you could also set this exact scene or very similar to it within your OSC, and then you're just basically moving the sides and the angles. I think that's a possibility. I think there's a way you could do that. So there's lots of nice features to this. It's just about, it's like the world is your oyster, but you're deciding how you want to select this all and how you want it to work. So in any case, let's go back to the actual geometry nodes, right? Right at this moment, I have the base color to this pink. You'll notice that this is more of a dark red, and that's because it's actually using this material, this material here. And what we're doing is we're just using the base color. So there's some things here you could probably affect, like I could probably add in color there. And that would, do some changing, but basically because it's a principled BSDF, it acts a little bit different. So a lot of that is more configuration changes. Most likely I'll probably have to do something like my normal will have to be that color, something of that nature. You'll basically have to set it up so that it's a matte. It's not this is the base color, but it's not the actual color itself, right? So this is more of like a salmon pinkish color, right? And so if I move to blue, it's pretty close to the blue that's already there, but because of lighting and because of all the other objects and them diffusing and so on and so forth, there's a lot there that needs to be modified and adjusted. It's not to say that's not possible. There's plenty of places there that we could work that out. But in this particular case, I'm not really worried too much about that right at this moment. I'm doing this as just an example case, right? This is for me basically testing out all these options of different things I could play with. So without further ado, let's go through some of them. Like for instance, now I have a top scale, right? So now I can scale up and down. I have a bottom scale that allows me to scale up and down the entire section of the bottom, right, the base, but I also have the option to change just the arch, just the edges left and right, and then I can also change this way. So I thought this was pretty darn cool. I could see a couple ways that I could use that, and my brain just went, and I just kind of was thinking there, like, okay, how can I use this to my advantage? There's lots of great applications. Like the ability to scale this in real time is the amazing part. But in any case, there's also the extrude. You don't technically see the extrude from this angle because we're right overhead. We're not really seeing it, but you can see there's a bit of a shadow there. We could change some of that if I go into my lighting, change the strength of this light to 0. So now we're just seeing just the two lights that I have set up, right? The point lights. And then what we could do is we could change the fall off, or what we could do is increase the lighting, right? And then G, Shift Z, and then I gotta move over the top of it. G, Shift Z, and then so now we're moving on the X and Y coordinates, right? And then I can go G, Z, and that will allow me to scale in and out, right? So it doesn't really change the 3D because again we're right over the top of it, and I think if I remember correctly, that's orthographic. It's not in perspective, if I'm not mistaken. And the reason why is because I'm on like a vertical overhead, and I think if I go to view, there's a way I can see that. But I'm not gonna get too much into that. Just know that that's probably the reason why it's doing that, is because it's the way in which we're over the top of it, and I think it's orthographic. If I remember correctly, it's like 5. Yeah. So if you hit 5, you'll notice that there's a little bit of a change there in the angle of the camera. One is orthographic and one is perspective. I'm not really too sure which one, but I can also, like, for instance, I can move it up and down, right? So because I'm just seeing it as overhead on top of it, you're not going to see the perspective to it other than the shadow itself. But there's some really great ideas there as far as what you could do with that. Just a heads up, this is just kind of a gee whiz. I turned off my visibility, or not my visibility, my gizmos, and I also turned off my, I think it's this one. It's this option here, the show overlays. And the reason being is because then you don't see these things, these extras in the actual projection, whatever you're sending, spouting over to other programs. Technically, what you could do is just create another window and then turn off them in the other window, and then just have another separate panel or separate window for all of your bells and whistles, so you can see everything but nobody else can. So it's kind of like you're the Wizard of Oz, kind of pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. In any case, sorry, bad joke. Okay, so let's go back to the curve, the geometry nodes. So some other things that are really nice about this, I also added in a outline, right? And then you change the intensity. Actually, let me turn off my 2 options. You can increase the intensity now, which is really nice. I figured out that this is actually set up through attributes within the shader material. So if I go to the shader material, sorry, wrong way. If I go to the shader material for the glow outline color, you'll notice that I used an emission shader. I have the color attribute, which is coming from outline color. And then I also have this attribute, which is the outline intensity size, right? So I can increase this tenfold, right? And then I can change the color of the outline, which I think is pretty spiffy. And I can also change the outline size. So I could have it really, really large, or I could have it really, really small. So the nice thing about this is that would basically allow me to change the glow intensity. I could set this on a slider, right? Or, excuse me, again with the Chatagene or Chatagene, Chatane, however you say it. When you're using Chatane, you could then set your MIDI controller to pick up your audio activity from your mic, and then feed that or spoon feed it to your MIDI controller, your OSC, as one of your values, and then it would basically become the FFT, right? And so you would basically have this kind of thing going on, right? Something like that. But in any case, there is a way to do that. I'm also looking into simulations as the next probably, well, maybe not now. I think my next thing is I'm probably going to have to do more of a real world test for this kind of thing. That is coming soon. I'm trying to think of how I want to set that up. I'm thinking about using pyramids. Maybe I want to do something different. But I think overall, I am ecstatically happy with how this has come out. And then I really do need to play with it within like setting something up in the real world and then setting up the perspective and yada yada yada. Obviously, I'm not going to be moving around. Well, right at this moment, I have no plans to doing this kind of thing on a projection mapping per se for the actual object itself because it's on the wall, it's stationary. However, I could use this as a way to create like graphics or like a false perspective that's coming from the edge and it's moving around within inside of that edge, that stationary place, whatever that object is. So all of this is to say that I think it's certainly viable. It really is. I think that this whole thing has been exciting to play around with. I've really enjoyed how this works. A lot of it is challenging, but not so far off the mark. It's not that I don't feel like it's impossible. The real thing is just remembering when to use what, where within geometry nodes. And that sometimes takes a little bit of practice and time, patience, and just a lot of, reading and just tinkering really is what it comes down to, tinkering. So I think that this is really kind of taking off. Some things to think about is that my geometry nodes, I should probably go to that just real quick since we're talking about geometry nodes. Let me bring up this real quick. So I'm going to shrink this down just so that we have a reference. This is my geometry nodes now, right? So it's not terrible. This is actually fairly manageable from a node-based system. I think this is fairly simplified. I think this is like, I've been weeding through, okay, what exactly is really important? I see a great deal of, I've been reading or watching a great deal of video tutorials about how geometry nodes works. I've been playing around with geometry nodes for a while, and I actually do, if you don't already know, I have experience with like wire patching with Resolume, and I've used other programs like FilterForge, and there's all kinds of node-based programs that I'm aware of. And so I kind of have an understanding of how this works. But Blender really has a lot of features that a lot of other programs don't, just simply because it's a three-dimensional program. So there's a lot more to it. It's not just a handful of nodes for a specific thing. This is more like there's so much to this that that's one of the reasons why I like this idea, is because Blender is like, if you don't have the ability, if you have the coding chops, you could make it yourself. And most programs are like that. Like Wire is that way. You could make your own node patches if you understood the coding behind the scenes. However, come on, turn off. I don't have the coding chops to figure that out. And I don't know why my little thing is not turning off. I could probably just, delete it. Okay, so what I did there was that was for my vector, for my indices. So I'm using a geometry curve from an SVG file that I created, was just an arch, right? All it is just, it looks like this. So if I go left edge and I set this to reset to default values, because I set this for a default value just in case. For this very reason, so then I can go right back to what it was before. Something more along the lines of like this. This is what the original arch looked like, something like this. Okay, and what I did was you hold shift and you can right click, I believe, the geometry node, or is it control? It's one of these. I just got to figure out which one it is. There. Okay, so Control Shift and left click, and when you do that, it brings up this viewer, right? And this viewer will allow you to see the values of the geometry nodes. You can't see them in this mode. I think you have to go like see like here. And what you do is you turn on your gizmos, and you'll notice now here are my nodes, or actually in this particular case, it's called points, right? Because we're using Blender. Blender uses points, not nodes, because nodes is a different thing entirely. But in any case, it's the same kind of thing. It's a Bezier curve, right? That's created in SVG. And then later on down the line, what I'm doing is I'm actually converting it to a mesh after I set the position. So, okay, so set position. Let's talk a little bit about that. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm basically taking the index, which is these numbers here. These are index numbers that are assigned by Blender. And then what it's doing is it's showing me this because I actually come down to here. There is color opacity, which is set to white, right? I turn that one off so I don't see, because typically you look more like this, right? And it's hard to see, right? But what I do is I just go to wireframe. But okay, so in any case, I'm sorry, I'm kind of squirrel. Okay, so like for instance, if I had color opacity on and I'm set here, it's kind of hard to see. But basically what I do is I turn off the color opacity. So now I no longer have that face option. And then I turn on the attribute text. And the attribute text is these numbers here. So the numbers are corresponded to the spreadsheet that's a part of Geometry Nodes. This is actually kind of helpful and useful. I didn't quite understand how this all works. Honestly, I would suggest there's a guy I'm learning about now, and his name is escaping me. He does geometry nodes. In any case, the thing that's really nice about this is it has some features that basically allow you to see like each node individually and how it's all controlled within this system. It shows you, like for instance, right now I'm just viewing a curve, right? If I go back into here and I go to the curve itself, you'll notice it's set for 3D. And that 3D curve is basically is up here as well. So it shows you have control points, and then there are the 12 control points, 0 being the first one really. And then 11 is 12, and so on and so forth. Because there's a 0, you start at 0, which is 1, and then you go through them. But in any case, what I've done is I'm basically telling it here, for instance, we'll give this example. This one says bottom slides, right? Bottom sides, excuse me. So it's saying I want values of 4 with the epsilon of 2. So I want 5, 4, and 3. And then what I want to do is I want to add them or use or. So if it equals this value or if it equals this value, I want you to set its position to the value that I have set in my group input, if you're understanding how that works, right? My group inputs, these values here are the things that you see here. So for instance, this would be bottom scale, that's this part here, and as I scale them, you're not going to see that because I have to turn this off, okay? I learned this the hard way. The viewer, when you have the viewer on, it doesn't scale them for whatever reason, and I think it has something to do with what I have set up in my geometry nodes. But in any case, now when I scale it, you'll see top scale, right? This is the bottom side. So let's actually look at bottom side scale. And so that's what that does, right? So I have the bottom sides. I have the top selection, which is the top selection is saying if it equals the 0 value. And the reason why I did this is actually kind of tricky. I need to show this because this was important. If I go back here, you'll notice that 0 starts here and 11 starts there. But I want to select 11, 0, 1, and 2. Selecting 0, 1, and 2 is easy because I just basically did the same thing as I did here. But what I realized is I also want to select 11 because 11 goes to 0, they're connected. I want this entire section. So what I actually had to do was I actually did the same thing as I did here, except in the first one, I'm actually saying I want to select the first 3, and then I'm also saying I want to also select 11 and with an epsilon of 0, and I want to combine them with the same thing as the or and as I did the other, or with the or as I did in the first set position, and then that is controlled by the combine XYZ on the Y axis, which is the same thing as it was before. So without further ado, give you an example, minimize that or turn that off, right? And if we go back here, yet again, that was the top scale. You'll notice that here the scale changes, right? So I'm gonna actually click 7 here so we can see that up here. And then I'm gonna go back to this and top scale, right? And then we also have the bottom scale, and then we also have the bottom side scales, and then we have the left edge as like we did before, right? And those are all set up here. So we have the bottom scales, we have the top selection, we have the bottom selection, the bottom side, excuse me, not bottom scales, bottom selection, and then this part here is the left selection. So I'm going to hit Command or Shift J or Command J, excuse me, Control J, excuse me, Control J, and then I'm just going to name this so I don't forget what it is. We're going to name this. We're going to go to the tools. I got to go here. There we go. I got it selected, and then I'm just going to call this left side. Right, and so I'm doing that just so I don't forget what is what. So when I go back to this geometry nodes, I'll know a little bit better about what I had selected and why I selected it. So then each one of these here, set position, you're doing a selection of the geometry that's coming in, and you're offsetting it based on the combine XYZ. And the position is set by this set here, which is my position and normal, and the vector rotate. And I'm setting this here as a 0, 0, 0 value so that the rest of it knows to stay stationary is basically what I'm using that for, right? So I have my position here, I have my position here, and position here. So I have the 4 that are set up. And the same thing with the combine X, Y, and Z's. I'm saying the selection, move, the selection, move, the selection, move, and so on and so forth. And basically, I can make selections based on that material. So I have my left side, and soon I'll have my right side. And what I can do is just basically, I could just duplicate this section here and this, and then set up the nodes accordingly, and then set it up with my group my group inputs here, and that will basically be the next object sizing is the way to control that. You learn a great deal through like just trying it out and just tinkering with it. What can I make it do? And so that's what I'm pretty much doing here. So to continue on, I have a fill curve which has the same material, and honestly, to tell you the truth, I could have probably, no, I have to set it up this way if I remember correctly, because I want them both to fill. So, okay, so this particular fill curve here, I'm basically telling it, after I've done all my position changing, fill that curve, which is this section here, okay, fill it with a face, or with the fill, and then extrude it, okay. And then what I'm doing here is I'm joining them all together. There is also a final process if you're doing more after that, where you can combine the pieces by distance, I believe it is. I think it's combined by distance. If you go distance, merge by distance, not combined by distance. When you do merge by distance, it's going to take these two things and merge them together. So I would probably, in that particular case, if I were to do that, I would probably have 2 joined geometries. I'd have one here. I'd have one here that basically, well, actually I could show you. So if I go A join geometry, right? And I move this here and I move this here, and I'm going to take these 2 out, right? These are my joined geometries. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge by distance, merge by distance, and then I'm going to do that and then do that. And the reason why I would do this is because then those two objects, these two objects here, this extrude and this face are combined together to make one box, whatever by geometry, right? So if I go into here, you can't really see that. There's not really a reason to do that here in this particular case, because it doesn't really, I don't think it really does anything right at this moment. Like it merges them, of course. However, there's really, visually, you're not going to see a difference, right? If I move this extrude, it's not going to make any difference. You'll also notice that my glow is now just the bottom edge. I had a bounding box option, which was really nice. It really worked out great because then you get this outer edge here that's doing that. But I am actually in the process of working that out. I have other ideas as to how I can make that happen. Namely, I could probably take this merge by distance, this distance here. I could add this as a value and then use that as a value to give me this outline here. And then what I would do is I would just basically tell it to do like I have here, where I've cut here. I've duplicated my element, okay, to create the outline. And what that means is I basically just duplicated the bottom face. I just moved all the way over to the other side. I've duplicated just the face at the bottom, okay? And what I've done is I've converted it to a curve, and then I converted it back to a mesh, and the reason being is because I wanted it to have this radius, this circle, okay? This is nothing more than, I don't know if you can see it, but it's basically like just a circle. This is just a circle that's been created as into like a noodle all the way around the entire edge. And then what I did was I divided it, the radius of that circle, so that I could change the size. So outline size is actually this divide here. That's where this is connecting. It's connecting to this back here. Okay, right here, outline size is now basically connected to scale divided by 0.60, divided by 60. And I did that so that the scale would not increase, so like the intensity of it wouldn't like, so like when I scale this, you'll notice that I have some control over it. If I took this out, this divide, it would scale so quickly that you can see it already. Like it just blows out everything, right? But if I try to scale this, it's so hard to get something than the smaller option. Like this is 0.40. So if I go back to the main value where it's connected to the divide by 60, now you'll notice that I actually have more control, granular control over how big that is. I'm not, so the intensity scale, the mapped range is not so small that when I make just an ever so slightly change, it increases over tenfold, right? So dividing by 60 is a way to fix that, right? So then I'm basically setting that to a curved circle with a radius, a resolution. Resolution is just basically the number of points in the circle. So 32, right? I could set that to 16. I don't think you would really see very much of a difference. You could do 8. I don't think you'd see a difference. By 4, it's going to look square. You can't see it here because it's so small, but it is more square-like. Sorry, dogs, going crazy. 16. So, give me 1 second. Sorry about that. Okay, so that's basically what the resolution does. Is it changes the radius of the circle, right? So I can set this back to 32. Excuse me. And so that will basically, so the radius is the scale, the size of the scale of the circle, right? And then the resolution is how many points are within that circle. So the more you have, the better it's going to look. You're not going to see it. In this particular case, because we're using it as an emission, technically, I don't think you'd really see it unless you were really up close. And that's not what it's being used for in this particular case, so a man on a fast horse wouldn't know the difference, in grand scheme of things. So if I hit 0 again, scale back out, you're not going to see it. So the only other thing that I added to this is the composition. So first things first, let's go into the compositor. And what I've done here in the compositor is not much. All I did was click on Use Nodes, which basically allows me to use the compositor node tree. And what I did was I added this glare with bloom set to high, with my mix at 0.30 and my threshold at 0.50 with a size of 8. All of these settings here basically allow this bloom option to happen. So without the bloom, it looks like this. And so I kind of like that bloom kind of look. I may want to back it down just a little bit for computer's sake, just so that my computer has a little bit better time processing it. I might even set it to low or medium. That would help to kind of give my computer a little bit extra wiggle room with other programs, because then it's not trying to render the composition, then afterward trying to bring it into Resolume and so on and so forth. So that's something to take into consideration when you do this. But basically, once this is set up, once you have the glare in between, you hit Use Node, the checkbox. These two options should be within. They'll have a direct connection. And all I did was just add glare in by hitting Shift A, and then typing in glare under filter, right? And there's all kinds of crazy things you could do with composition node trees. The disadvantage to this is I'm being told that composition node trees do not work in the spout output. So that's one of the disadvantages. You could technically use another program that allows you to take a spout output from a window output, and you can use, I'm trying to remember the name of the program. This spout capture, spoutwinCapture.exe. I found it on VJ Union. I'm a part of the VJ Union crew, and they sent something out, and I was like, oh, I think that'll be very helpful, because then I can basically output anything that is anything within a window. So the disadvantages to it is that anything that's within that window you will see, and if you move the window around, then you're going to see that within your projection or within your spout output, right? So all of these menus and whatnot, it's like sometimes it's easier to do a spout output, because a spout output would just be what you see within the viewing plane versus what you would see in the entire window. There are ways that you can hide all that and make that happen. I used the WinCapture for Black Ink a few years back for projection mapping festival here where I live, called the Public Eyesore. You're welcome to look them up on publiceyesore.com. We do it every year. It's an amazing event. We do all kinds of projection mapping stuff and projection art. So please take a look at that. Shameless plug. But I've used it before, and it really did come in handy, because then I could use something like Black Ink that doesn't have a spout output, and I can just directly push it to any program, which was very much like this. It's very useful. There's some good techniques that you could use that for. Okay, so once you have your composition set up, all you have to do is just make sure to set your compositor as always, which will allow you to see it in your viewport. And then you do as you do normally. So if I go back to geometry nodes, like we were talking about before, I have all these options, right? And now I can change the color. You'll notice that it takes a little bit of time for it to render. We're using the Eevee engine, and it's trying to render that in real time. So, like I was saying before, modifying these numbers sometimes will help to kind of clear that up. Right at this moment, I have the mix set to 1, or to 3.3. I could take that down. The threshold is set to 0.5. I could probably bring it up to like 0.7, so now you're not seeing the glare from the light because it's so close to the edge, and you still get some of that bloom going on, which is nice. So now when I go back to geometry nodes and I try to make those changes, but you can tell it already kind of like dimmed it. It doesn't look as brilliant. And the reason being is because it has to do with the compositor is just, it really does add something to your scene. So I'm going to increase this back to like 2, we'll say 0.2 for the mix. I'm going to go back to geometry nodes, and it's still kind of, it's not as great, right? So in any case, that's pretty much it. I just wanted to kind of give you guys a basic rundown as to how that all is set up in geometry nodes. The only other thing was the color, the outline color. I set an attribute node. And how I did that was I basically created an attribute from the input, the group input, which you can do through, you hit group, you pull up your N panel, I forgot what they call that. The viewing panel on the right hand side by hitting N, right? And then you go to your group, and then here's your inputs. Your outputs are right here, your group sockets, right? So then these are your group output sockets, and the ones with the left, the circle on the left is the input circuits. So I created one for base color, changed the type to color, and then what I did was I connected that base color all the way back over here to my group outputs, and I connected it to object color, and then I made an outline color, and I basically type in the name. You tell it what you want to name it, okay? And then once you've done that, your output attributes will be set here, and you just basically give it a name. So it's very much like a variable. You're basically creating a variable. You're saying, this is the color I want you to keep as a variable, and this is the variable name. And then what I do is in my shading tab, I basically call upon that variable by doing an A for search, right? And then I just type in attribute, which is under input. If you really wanted to look up, you could go like this, and you could go to input, and there's attribute right there, okay? And so once you have that attribute, you basically tell it what the name of that attribute is. So I just, you select this and you copy paste, or you can type it in yourself, just make sure it's the same name. And then I basically feed those into their retrospective selections or inputs, right? So I wanted this attribute, which is the outline color, which is this one up here, outline color, which is the green. And I wanted that one to like be able to, change the outline color, right? There's not too much to that, right? So there's the size and the intensity. You'll notice that the intensity is not as crazy right now. If I increase that, it's not so bad, but it's also because I'm in the shading input, and I also didn't turn it on here. But in any case, I'm rambling. I could go on for days about this. If you're interested in this, you want a little bit more information about how I set this up, just give me a holler. I can set up a Discord time with you, and we can talk about it if you'd like. If you find this interesting, please get in contact with me. My email address is Jacob, Jacob, Mesick, Mesick, @gmail.com. Thank you very much for your interest in what it is that I'm doing, and you be sure to have a great day.